We live in a world of busy calendars, going from one engagement to another, one task to the next. And this very often is mirrored within ourselves too, in the constant noise and clutter that sometimes becomes the very landscape of our minds. Welcome back to Inwardly with Sanjana. Today we're going to talk about how stillness and silence can help us once again access our inner truth. Joining me today is Kelly Townges. Kelly is a thoughtful leader, a guide, and a practitioner of deep introspection. Thank you, Kelly, for being here today and welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here, Santana.
Yeah, it's a great start to the weekend for sure.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. So, Kelly, having had the privilege of working with you and knowing you for a few years now, I've been fortunate to see your leadership style, which has been extremely grounded and compassionate. And I've seen you use reflection as a means to create balance and stability, even in complicated situations. And so I think you're the perfect voice for today's conversation. And I'm so excited to explore this topic with you.
Great. I am eager to explore this as well, Sanjana, and I just am grateful to you for giving this topic platform and airspace in our world because, like your intro really resonated with me because I think we have all felt that at times. And I think many have felt the craving for something different. So I'm really excited to explore this topic with you today.
Yes, yeah, so let's dive in. I'm going to start by asking you what your definition of stillness is. What does it really mean to you?
Yeah. That's a great question. For me, stillness typically involves quiet or sounds of nature. And when I think of sounds of nature, I think of birdsong or the movement of water. Um, but it also can be very quiet as well. So there's that element. For me, there is also the element of solitude and being alone. Um, I think I think in solitude we uncover gifts that we're not able to access when we're surrounded by company and other people. So for me, there's an element of solitude in stillness as well, and and assurance that I won't be interrupted in that solitude. And let me give an example. My three children are grown; they're adults now, but when they were young, it was difficult to get that time alone. And if I did, there was rarely the assurance that I was not going to be interrupted. In
Yeah.
fact, we still joke about a situation where one of my children as a toddler, I frequently would go to the bathroom and close the door to get some solitude, and there was a time where he put his tiny little fingers underneath the door and he was saying, "Mom, mom." And you try to relax and have solitude when there's like little fingers underneath the door. So
Yeah.
so I think for me there is some assurance of that solitude is protected. And I know that that can be really hard in the world today, and I'm eager to talk about that as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's hard at times, and it takes a lot of intention, I think, to actually make it happen for yourself.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So, looking back over time, when do you think this even became a priority for you? Was there a particular life situation or a turning point where you started thinking more about introspection, reflection, and things like that?
Yeah. I think I have always had a natural disposition towards contemplation and reflectiveness, and that requires stillness and silence. So I think I've always had in my DNA the enjoyment of silence. I think that's built into who I am. I want to acknowledge it's not like that for everybody, and so I
Yeah.
respect that, definitely. For me, um, I feel as though silence is something that used to be easier to get, and stillness used to be easier to access. And let me talk about that a little bit because I think that there are people that based on when they were born may not realize the world used to be a different place. And I'm not that old,
Yeah.
but I do remember a day in early in my working career where I couldn't access email unless I was in the physical building. There was not such a thing as remote connectivity, let alone cellular access. So
Right.
when I left work at the end of the day, I was truly disconnected from work. And so I really think it's at that point that I had to put much more intentionality into seeking stillness and silence and solitude because the world has become, we've become much more accessible, and we expect ourselves to be accessible and connected as well.
Yeah, it's almost like this underlying unsaid or unasked pressure that has become a part of our lives where you feel almost an obligation to sort of be constantly available.
Yes, yes, Sanjana, I can relate to that. In fact, a couple of months ago, I upgraded my cell phone and ran into some issues, and it was getting to be evening, and I said, "I am not gonna solve this tonight. It will wait until tomorrow."
Yeah.
But I asked my husband to send a note to the kids or a text to our 3 children, just letting them know that I was offline and that I was having issues with my phone and I would not be reachable. And my son responded back and said, okay, nobody can have an emergency until mom is back online. And I think that just really speaks to, especially as women, how we are expected to be accessible to those around us. And whether that's our expectation or theirs, I really think that that is a real thing in the world today and something worth exploring a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. But I think maybe also looking at it from the other side of the coin, maybe it's the sense of comfort and ease that you cultivate and provide that then sets that
Yeah.
expectation where people feel like they can rely on you and you have their back essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like as you're saying that, I think that's probably part of the tension there because
Mhm.
we want we want to be that to those around us, you know? I crave to nurture those around me, and part of that is being available to them when they need me to be available. But I also need to realize that stillness, silence, solitude are things that I need to be in order to show up as things that I need in order to show up in the way that I want to show up. And so I think you strike on a very natural tension there.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky balance sometimes. So are there things that you do intentionally? Are there, personal rituals or
Mm.
things that have become a part of your daily life that help you cultivate that space for yourself?
Yes, in fact, yes, with an exclamation point. So
Okay.
I have a, morning practice, a daily ritual. When I get up, I do not pick up my phone right away. I come down and I have coffee, and I light a candle, and I journal. I do some reading, some inspirational reading, some scriptural reading. I pray, sometimes I meditate depending on how much time I have. but that is very protected time for me every single morning. The only time I don't do that is if we're traveling and we have a really early flight and we need to get to the airport really early.
Right.
But otherwise, I protect that time because I know that I need it. And so that's one daily ritual. I also have a regular practice every 9 to 12 months of going on retreat. And lately it's been a silent retreat because that really fills my soul. Just not having to talk for anybody, knowing that I don't have to perform or show up a certain way or fill a certain role is just almost like a relief for my soul. It just sort of breathes out and says, okay, I get this time to be exactly what I need to be. And so that balance is it works well for me to get that retreat, which is a more extended time, but that's not enough for me. I also need that daily grounding practice to do that as well.
Yeah. I think that's so amazing that you know set time aside to do something like that where you can just be 100% available to your own self.
Yeah. And I do wanna say it is not easy some days. Sanjana, you and I have both worked in similar environments where the demands of work do not do not lend themselves well to
Yeah.
the nurturing of the soul. And so I feel for me, that is something that I need to protect and prioritize because I certainly don't expect corporate America to do it, but if I don't do it, who will do it? So it's a very personal decision for me to do that.
I think we owe that to ourselves, and then we can be available to the people around us in better ways, and I think in a better capacity.
I agree. I agree. Very, very well stated. And the other thing that I think about in this world is that we spend a significant portion of our life experience is experienced through the narrative in our minds. And therefore, I feel as if I want to be really aware and intentional of the narrative that is running through my mind because that is going to shape my life experience.
Yeah, sure. That's very important. I'd like to explore this a little more. I feel like sometimes there is pressure. I feel more so with women where, you know, taking time for yourself or prioritizing yourself very often is construed as being selfish. And
Mm,
there's this kind of a negative connotation to even wanting to do something to yourself. I know I've seen and
yeah.
experienced that in different circumstances and situations, you know, with myself and, you know, people around me, but sometimes I wonder whether that's more cultural. So I'd like to open that up to ask if you've experienced something like that, given that, you know, you've grown up and lived your entire life on the other side of the planet from me.
Yeah, yeah. It exists over here as well, definitely. There's that, expectation, whether it's self-imposed or by society, that's an interesting question to me, but there is that sort of, um, thought that self-care is selfish, and I think we need to believe that it is not, that in order for me to show up in the world in the way that I want to and display the qualities that I aspire to display, I think we need to make that distinction between selfish and self-care, self-nurturing. Really, it's uh, feeding our soul, in my mind, is as essential to us as breathing. So, and if we don't look after what goes in, uh, I think we might not want to think about what would come out. So, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
for sure.
It also makes me think, Sanjana, about, busyness is a great distractor.
Mhm.
And I think of Newton's first law, where an object in motion will stay in motion in the same
Yeah.
direction at the same speed until it's acted upon by an external force. And so
Mhm.
I think of those things like my daily morning ritual and my retreat. I think of those as the external forces that help me break that cycle of motion, because sometimes we feel like we can't stop, and that's exactly the point, that I think we have to.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes we need to rely on those external support systems to just help propel us in the direction that we want to go once again.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I also think there's an element, so you talked about, it being selfish. I also think that there's an element of people honestly don't know what to do in silence and solitude. And I was in a conversation with a group of my friends the other night, and we were talking about Sabbath and solitude, and one of them said, "But what do you do?" And I think that's a really valid question, because we don't do it very often. I talked about the fact I feel like it's in my DNA, and I very naturally migrate to silence and the enjoyment of that, but not everybody is like that. And so we had a really good conversation about, what about a coloring book? What about just a gentle walk without AirPods and without a podcast and without a book, just listening to what's around you? Um, and I feel like this is an area where I'm grateful to my parents, because they exposed me to a lot of different mediums that I think helped me realize stillness in a really different way. It doesn't necessarily mean sitting still to me. It could mean picking blueberries in a field in northern Minnesota, which is something that we regularly did. It might be putting our family of 6 into a 16-foot fishing boat and spending an evening out on the lake fishing. And so as I was thinking about this podcast and just really what shaped that for me, I think a lot of it is I know what to do within silence and solitude, but I can see a very real I see them around me where people really don't know what to do with that. So I think some practical tools to kind of help them find their on-ramp to that,
Yeah.
is really valuable in this world.
Yeah, I think because sometimes also it can be scary. I think a lot of times busy is good for people because busy is kind of a distraction. And
Yes.
when you want to think of doing the opposite and going silent or experiencing stillness, I think then sometimes it's like waking the devils and all the
Yes.
noises that you've tried to silence actually come to the forefront. And that can be quite
Yes.
a scary experience, I think, for people.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Excuse my Kleenex. It is warming up here in Minnesota, and so allergy season has kicked in.
Oh,
So
no worries.
yes, yes. But I agree with what you just said, and I think that illustrates the need for spending time with ourselves. I think in our busyness, that is a distraction for us, and I think it keeps us from knowing ourselves and knowing ourselves well. And who was it? Was it Socrates who said, "Know thyself"? There's huge value in that. Sometimes people are like, "Why do I keep finding myself in these situations? And why do I keep doing this over and over again?" Even though I don't want to. And I think that in stillness, we can find the time to reflect and understand what's underneath that. But that can be scary to uncover that, because it requires transformation. It frequently requires change, and that can be scary.
Yeah, because just that journey of exploration can maybe bring about versions of yourself that you don't necessarily like and things that you want to change. But like you said, that process of change can be quite scary. And I think it takes courage to lean into that and make a commitment to do so.
I agree. I agree. Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I was at a yoga program, I think this was last year. And interestingly, through that program, one of the activities, the question was, who are you? And that
Mm.
was quite deep because usually when people ask, okay, tell me about yourself and what do you do, we talk about, our maybe personal lives, the relationships that define us, or the work that we do, whether it's a project in a corporation or something that we do individually. But seldom do we think about stripping
Mm.
away all of those elements and truly looking at who am I? Like, what
Mm.
constitutes this soul beyond the body and mind?
Yes, I love that, Sanjana, because you are right. So frequently, when we meet somebody and introduce ourselves, we use a title, a job title, a role, wife, sister, mother. I love the idea of really not what do you do, but who are you underneath that? Tell me a little bit about that journey for you.
That was actually quite eye-opening, and as simple as a question as it seemed, I didn't have an answer to it at the time.
Yeah.
And I sat with that for a long time to say, okay, if I'm going to peel away all of these layers, like who's left standing in front of the mirror? And
Mhm.
do I like that version? Do I not like that version? So it came
Yeah.
with some sort of discomfort for sure, where it was almost a process of trying to understand myself and get to know myself in a very different light for the
Yeah.
first time. And it wasn't a one and done. It was something that I
Mhm.
spent time on, and I don't know if I still have a very concrete answer to it. But it's
Yeah.
iterative. It's a discovery process, and then leaning into making changes. I think because it's just that journey of everyone wanting to be the best version of themselves.
Right. Yeah. I something that I really appreciate about what you just said, Sanjana, is eh, we can't time box this stuff all the time. It is okay to sit in the space of I don't know. And I love that you describe that as a process of discovery. It should be. We're really complex individuals with deep, deep layers and souls. And so, if you can answer that question in 10 minutes, I would really question the quality of the answer that we're providing.
Yeah.
However, I think in our productive, achievement-driven culture, when somebody asks that question, you're like, okay, I need to have an answer and it needs to be really, really good. I could even see in this day and age some people turning to Chat GPT to say, who am I? It's like, get me started here. I am not encouraging people to do that. I am
Yeah.
encouraging take the time to sit with that. But I love that you were okay spending time there and being in sort of an uncomfortable space. I think frequently as I think about it, I think frequently that's what stillness is for me, is it
Mhm.
can be an uncomfortable space because I'm examining how I'm showing up in the world, and sometimes that's different than how I aspire to show up in the world.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. How do you think this process or this journey of exploration has changed you as a person? Like you just said, it kind of defines how you show up in the world. What's the
Yeah.
one big difference, or a couple big differences that stand out for you as you look at yourself over the years?
Yeah, definitely. As you were introducing me, you used the word, I think, grounded, and I wanna do a double click on that a little bit because
Mhm.
I used to, when my children were young, there was a lot of talk in the workplace about balance and achieving balance and what is the right work-life balance. And I came to realize for me, balance is a really hard thing. I think of one of those beam balances with a fulcrum in the middle and a beam and two, metal pans on either side. And if you arrange the things just perfectly on those metal pans, you can get it to balance. But if anything shifts, it's out of balance. It's maybe toppling over. Well, my world is full of shifting things, and I am guessing that most of your listeners, their worlds are full of shifting things. So a really effective sort of visualization for me has been to think about it in terms of grounding instead of balance. And what are the things that I need to do to keep me grounded as all of the things around me are shifting? And there's a scripture verse, I think it is Jeremiah 7:17 through 18, that talks about a tree planted near water that develops deep roots. And that is a really good visual for me as I think about how do I operate amidst all of the shifting things. So I think about it in terms of grounding instead of balance. For me, that has been really effective.
Thanks for sharing that. What do your silent retreats look like? I'm curious to know, is this something that's
Yeah.
organized, and is it a group activity, or is it something you do by yourself?
Yeah, great question. So my experience, they have always been structured. And so uh, people show up together. There's usually a gathering of other retreatants and just sort of an orientation. There's not even an introduction to other people, but there's an orientation. And then the longest retreat, a silent retreat I've done is 4 days. I'd like to try longer. It's just working it into the schedule. But for me, they have been a series then of sort of conference talks where people come back together. There is typically a pastor or layperson that speaks on a particular topic, and then people go back apart. But within that conference talk, there is not talking amongst the participants. In all of the silent retreats I've been at, they've been at retreat centers, and it is interesting to me. They always offer sort of the out room if people find they really need to talk about something or they really need to connect with humans again. There is always that space where they can, after a conference talk, gather with other people. It is interesting to me. I never choose to do that. I always choose to savor that solitude and that alone time. And then at the end, it is they've the ones that I've been at, they typically do a meal, the last meal where you do talk with the other participants of the retreat. And it's
Okay.
so funny because at that point, people start to introduce themselves and they frequently say, "Here's what I do. Here's my role in the home. Here's my role in the professional world." And people have guessed me to be everything from a school teacher to a music director, which is absolutely funny because I have very little musical talent, to just a whole variety of things, but never a leader in the corporate world. Never has anyone guessed that. And so that's interesting to me to think about. I show up there in a really different way than I show up many of the days of my work life, and that's just something that I like to explore a little bit.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. I mean, if they got music director, but were not able to maybe guess that you're a leader, at a corporation, then I think that
Yes.
the energy that you bring there is different, and unique to that
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah, you're right, Santana, and that comment makes me question how I love my job. I love what I do, but it does make me ponder how much of the way that I need to show up in my job is really sort of at odds with my natural grain and how I would show up in other environments. And I haven't thought about that before, but I'm going to ponder that a little bit because I believe that when we build on existing strengths, it takes much less energy than when we're trying to take a deep weakness and build it into a towering strength. That takes a lot of energy. So as I think about it, it's an interesting thing to ponder, and I don't have an answer to that, but it is something that,
Yeah.
and I love my job, but how much energy is it taking just to get to that point of, "Here's how I know I need to show up in this environment."
Yeah, but from what I've seen, I don't see that it's ever been an energy struggle, or at
Yeah,
least it doesn't come across like that. I think you always come
yeah,
across as very authentic and there are no layers. So it seems
yeah,
to me that you're bringing that best version of yourself, regardless of the situation, at least in my
yes.
experience.
I appreciate you saying that. So absolutely, absolutely. It would be interesting to go on a silent retreat together sometime and say, okay, how do I observe Kelly in that
Yeah.
environment versus the work environment? So yeah,
Yeah, that
yeah.
might be something fun to do.
Exactly,
Oh.
exactly. So, but I do appreciate your words there because you know, I value how I show up in the world, and I take that very seriously. I do feel like as fellow citizens on planet Earth here, we have an obligation to show up for others in ways that are authentic to us and help build up the people around us instead of tearing them down.
Yeah, I think
There's enough
that's
in this world
exactly
to tear
what,
down.
yeah, that's what humanity needs. And I think if everyone commits to doing that, even in a small way, I
Yeah.
think it can be quite profound in terms of the change that it can bring about.
Yeah, I agree. What a beautiful world it would be if, so we'll get this podcast out there broadly so that everybody hears it and takes that inspiration.
Yes, that's the hope. Thank you. I
Yes.
want to talk a little bit about the world that we are in right now, which is AI, and a lot of it
Mhm.
is talking to computers. I think we're talking
Yeah.
to screens a lot more today than we ever did in the past. So I feel like as much as people have enjoyed being in a space where they can interact with other humans, I've seen a
Mhm.
lot of people who are very easily now taking comfort in not doing that. And they
Yeah.
almost have a preference of chatting with a system, or, Gemini or ChatGPT, and having an
Mhm.
interaction or getting answers for pretty much anything. So I wonder
Yeah.
though, I don't think that's a form of stillness or silence because, again, it's
Mhm.
not you sitting with yourself. But in this constant interaction where our human to human interaction may have reduced, but we're in a different form
Mhm.
of interaction with digital aspects. Do you think
Mhm.
this is kind of increasing the noise and clutter within ourselves and taking us further away from truly being able to connect with who we are?
Yeah. Absolutely. I do believe it is. I believe technology and AI has a place. Absolutely. I believe it has a place and it has huge value in our society. I believe it is up to us to exercise boundaries around that, though. I mean, I think about when I was early in my career and my children were young, if I took a sick day because I was sick or one of the kids were sick, I was able to sit all day holding that child with no expectation of technology infringing upon that time. Even children today here where I live, we get snow, and if there's a snow day, it used to be the kids were outside playing in the snow. Now they turn it into an e-learning day, and they're spending time in front of their computers, not interacting or playing with each other. So I feel like technology and AI has taken that to a next level where it is infringing on parts of our world. I think that there is science coming out about how that affects our brains and really
Mhm.
physically impacts our brains. And I think we're well served to tune into that, and really try to try to protect our own boundaries. And even those around us, actually, we talked a little bit about our obligation to humanity and the way that we show up in the world and how we support those around us. Technology is one component of that. If we see somebody in our sphere and we see them falling into that, invite them out for a cup of coffee, invite them out for a walk. How can we bring human interaction into our world and help people remember that that's an essential part of being human?
Yeah, very true. I think, yeah, it's that little bit of responsibility and just
Yeah,
being mindful about what can I do and how can this make a change, even if it's something small.
yeah,
But I think in the grand scheme of things, it still contributes to something that's larger than us.
yeah. Well, and I was just talking with a colleague the other day, who has a daughter who is 11, and so very much in that vulnerable age, wants a phone, wants social media, and we were talking about the need to protect youth. And not only is it technology changes the human brain, but play develops and physical play develops the human brain. So it's not only sort of what are the implications of technology, but what's the opportunity cost of what's not taking place in that child's life. And I think even as adults, we benefit from play and
Yeah.
nature and so forth. So
Yeah.
um,
It's
yeah, it,
interesting
it
that
is
you bring
difficult.
up that example, though, with children, because it's something that I've kind of been pondering too. I remember when I was a child, sometimes I think many times I would play by myself because I didn't have a lot of kids in the neighborhood at the time who were,
Yeah,
a similar age group. But I remember times where I could be by myself for hours. I would find maybe
mhm,
one rock or one stone in the garden that fascinated me, and I could
yeah,
sit with that and just, be with it and maybe make up stories or make up a game and do all kinds of things with a pebble or maybe
yeah,
a shell that I found in sand somewhere. And it was not
yeah,
just me. I've seen a lot of others do this too, but I feel like all of that was a form of stillness, was a form of just knowing how to be with yourself. And that's
yes,
missing in the kids that I see these days, because even you go to a restaurant and the child cannot eat a meal without having their phone in
right,
front of them playing a cartoon strip or something like that. So
yes,
I think it's a
yes.
larger question and something for everyone to take stock of. I think we need more conscious decisions around what we're doing and how that imprint is
Yeah.
going to carry forward into generations to come.
Yeah, Sanjana, I love that. And as you were talking about being a child, I agree. I remember things in my childhood where I could play alone. We lived in a neighborhood. I was just as comfortable playing alone as with other kids and had both. Um, your story inspires me to say, "Hey, could we take a walk this afternoon? Find a stone, sit on a bench." watch nature around. When is the last time that you did something like that? Because I feel like that gives our brain space to process everything that is going on around us. So, in fact, my youngest daughter is in college right now, and when she goes out with her friends to dinner, this isn't the evening out stuff that they do in college, but when they go out to dinner, she has talked to my husband and I, and she's like, I just don't like it when we're all sitting at dinner and everybody's on their phone. And so she
Yeah.
has started carrying in her purse like a deck of cards and dice, and she'll draw the people at that table into a game that forces that human interaction. And I didn't tell her to do that, but she's doing it, and it just makes me so proud that she is really trying to forge a different path and give herself and her friends a different experience.
Yeah, that's lovely. And it's a small act, but it does
Yeah,
something profound, I think.
yeah, yeah, and that
Excuse
makes
me.
me think it doesn't have to be big, right? I think when people think of um, stillness and silence, they think it's an all or nothing. I don't think it has to be big. I think it can be little decisions throughout the day that we make that can have a huge impact.
I know that you recently had your first grandchild.
I
So
did.
that's very
Yes.
exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So, given the new family dynamic of having a little one in the house, how has that impacted your routine and the time that you like to keep protected and preserved for yourself? And are there things that you're helping cultivate to bring that, to your daughter who's had the baby and just to the larger household?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. There's nothing like a new puppy or a new baby to sort of change the equilibrium that exists in a household. And so, uh, one of the things that as a mother is really impactful for me is both of my daughters practice a similar routine that I do in the morning. One of my daughters is in the morning, she does it. The other one, it works for her better in the evening, and that's her rhythm. And so it has been interesting to try to be there for my daughter in a way that still allows her to get that time and to help her realize she can step away from the baby and go for a walk if there's another responsible adult there to watch the
Right.
baby and so forth. Um, so that, my daughter and her husband live about a 45-minute drive from us, which is very doable in the environment that we're in. And so I find to myself really wanting to be there, not only to spend time with my granddaughter, but to help my daughter and son-in-law not get lost in the only thing that I can be is a parent. And so really trying to be there for them and give them that sense that you're still an individual. And I was over there the other day, and my son-in-law said, I'm gonna go for it's one of the last ski days that I can get out there. I'm gonna go for a cross country ski. I'm like, go do it. My daughter took the dog for a walk, and so I think I feel like I play a pivotal role in helping them realize they can still take time for self-care and self-investment and nurturing themselves even amidst the new baby in the household. So,
That's beautiful,
yeah,
Kelly. And it's so wonderful that you're able to provide that comfort and relief, just even in terms of
yeah,
time. So it's wonderful. And I
yeah,
think that's what everyone needs is having people who you can rely on and just take a
yeah.
break to feed your soul once again.
Right, right. Exactly, exactly. I agree because I think back to my early days, when my children were little, and my husband was instrumental in helping me get that time as well, and I am so grateful for that, and others in my life were as well. My mother, my sisters, my mother-in-law. Um, in fact, a funny story, my husband was very supportive of the self-care, self-nurturing time, and one time our oldest was, an infant, she was maybe a month old, and I nursed our children, and, it was evening, and I said, "I just wanna take a bath," and my husband said, "Go take a bath. I've got the baby. It will all be fine." And so I ran the bath water, and turned off the bath water, and I could hear the baby screaming from the other room, and she
Oh,
was really being fussy for my husband, and he came to the door with this crying baby in his arms and said, "Don't worry about us here. Enjoy your bath. Everything is fine." And it
oh,
was
that's
just it was
lovely.
really yes, exactly. I just think back, thank goodness I had that support, and I wanna pay that forward for my daughter and son-in-law as well. So,
Yeah, that's just beautiful, and I'm so glad
yeah.
they have you and that support in you.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's a role that I love to fill. It is a very fulfilling role. So,
I'm
yeah.
sure. Yeah, so as we're wrapping up here, I'd like to ask, what's your one piece of advice or one thought that you'd like to leave the audience with, especially if there's someone listening who is struggling maybe or trying to
Yeah.
find their way to declutter and just find their own stillness and inner peace? What would you recommend?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. I have 2 thoughts on that. One thing that I frequently hear from people when we talk about stillness and solitude is, "I have a hard time finding time. When do I find time?" We all have the same number of minutes in a day, so I think it's less about time and more about intentionality, and prioritization of how we spend that time. So that would be one. The other thought is think of it as a gift to yourself, truly, to expect yourself to show up in a beautiful way in the world when you've not taken the time to feed your beautiful self. It's not a fair expectation of yourself. So think of it as a gift to yourself, and give yourself grace and time and space to do it.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I don't think we
Yeah.
think about gifting ourselves even the gift of time.
Yeah.
So I think that's a beautiful takeaway, even for me personally. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I have enjoyed this conversation so much, Sanjana.
Me too. It's definitely the highlight of my weekend. And yeah, I
Good.
know we've spoken so many times around so many different things, but I think there are limitations to what we experience in the work
Yes.
environment. So this has been lovely to
Yes.
just step away from that and get to know you better in a different capacity. So thank you so
I
much.
agree. I agree. You are very, very welcome, and I have enjoyed it as well.
Me too. I hope you have a great weekend. And
Yeah.
for all those listening out there, I hope this conversation helps you find a small path back to your own self. Until next time, take care and keep thinking inwardly.